My name is Jake, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over 20 years. I thought I had seen everything the road had to offer: storms, accidents, even the occasional strange hitchhiker. But nothing compares to what happened last month, when I took a route through the mountains and found a tunnel that shouldn't have existed. It was just past 3 a.m. when I saw it. The highway curved sharply ahead, and as I rounded the bend, there it was, a long dark tunnel stretching into the mountain. I didn't remember ever seeing it before, but my GPS insisted it was the correct route. Maybe I had just never driven this way at night. I flicked on my high beams and entered. The moment I crossed the threshold, my radio cut to static. My dashboard clock froze at 3:17 a.m. A deep unease settled in my chest. Something was wrong. The tunnel was endless. I should have emerged within minutes, but the road stretched on, a monotonous, unchanging path. The yellow lane markings glowed faintly under my headlights, repeating in a pattern that started to feel unnatural, as if I were driving in place. I pressed the gas, but my speedometer stayed the same. Then, I saw something in my mirror, a shape. Vague, shifting, just at the edge of the darkness. I forced myself to focus on the road. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or exhaustion playing with my head. But deep down, I knew something was there. Watching then, the whispers started, soft, unintelligible at first, like a distant radio transmission. Then, clearer. Keep driving. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. My headlights flickered, and for a split second, the tunnel around me seemed to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a single drop. My hands started to sweat. The air grew thick, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I checked my phone. No signal. The GPS screen had gone black. That's when I saw the sign. A road sign on the right side of the tunnel, barely illuminated by my lights. The words were faded, almost unreadable. Turn back. A deep, primal fear surged through me. I slammed the brakes, but the truck didn't slow. My foot pressed uselessly against the pedal as the whispers grew louder. Keep driving. I looked in the mirror again. The shape was closer now. It had no form, no features, just darkness, shifting like smoke. But I could feel its eyes. A single thought consumed me. I couldn't let it reach me. I wrenched the wheel to the side. If stopping wasn't an option, maybe I could break free another way. The truck veered sharply, scraping against the tunnel wall with a metallic scream. Sparks flew. The whispers turned to shrieks. Then dash light, blinding golden light, flooded my vision. The truck lurched forward, and suddenly, I was outside, skidding onto a deserted highway. I slammed the brakes. The truck groaned to a stop. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at my surroundings. The road was unfamiliar. The stars above were all wrong, brighter than they should be, arranged in constellations I didn't recognize. And the sign next to me, it wasn't in any language I had ever seen. My radio crackled back to life, but the voice that came through wasn't dispatch. Welcome back. I didn't stick around. I threw the truck into gear and sped down the highway, hoping I'd find my way home. But deep down, I knew I had left something behind in that tunnel, and something had followed me out. My name is Luke, and I've been a highway patrol officer for almost a decade. I've dealt with reckless drivers, drug smugglers, and even the occasional high-speed chase. But nothing has unsettled me more than the night I encountered the convoy. It was just past midnight when the call came in. A trucker had reported an unusual sighting on Highway 17, a line of old, rusted military vehicles moving slowly down the road without any visible drivers. At first I thought it was a joke, but something in the caller's voice told me he was dead serious. I was only a few miles away, so I decided to check it out. As I approached, my dashboard lights flickered, and my radio filled with static. That was my first sign that something wasn't right. Then, I saw them. 6 trucks, all identical, moving in perfect synchronization. Their headlights were dim, as if struggling to stay lit, and the metal of their bodies was covered in patches of rust and grime. They looked decades old, out of place on the modern highway. I switched on my sirens and pulled up behind them, signaling for the convoy to stop. Then I grabbed my radio. "This is Officer Luke Daniels, requesting identification from the drivers of the military convoy on Highway 17. Pull over immediately." No response. The trucks continued forward, undeterred. I sped up alongside them, trying to get a look at who was inside. That's when I realized the cabs were empty. No drivers, no passengers, just empty seats behind cracked windshields. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of remote-controlled experiment, a government test gone wrong. Still, I had to act. I pulled ahead of the lead truck and angled my cruiser sideways, blocking the road. For the first time, the convoy slowed. I stepped out, my hand hovering over my holster, and took a cautious step forward. The trucks were silent now, their engines idling, their presence oppressive. The air around me felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Then, as if someone flipped a switch, all their headlights went out at once. Darkness swallowed the highway. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could switch it on, a voice whispered through my radio. "You weren't supposed to see this." The breath left my lungs. I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. But I was alone. I grabbed my radio, my fingers trembling. "Who's there?" Static. Then, another whisper. "Turn around." I ignored it. I had to figure out what was happening. I stepped closer to the nearest truck and reached for the handle. My fingers barely brushed the cold metal when the truck shuddered violently. The sound of grinding gears and screeching metal filled the air as the convoy roared to life again. Before I could react, the trucks began reversing fast. They moved in perfect unison, retreating down the highway at an impossible speed. My cruiser's lights flickered, and my radio continued to whisper unintelligible words. I jumped back, my breath coming in short gasps. As the convoy disappeared into the night, I stood there, frozen, listening to the silence that followed. The road was empty again. No tire marks, no lingering sounds of engines, as if they had never been there at all. I rushed back to my cruiser and called it in. Dispatch said there were no military convoys scheduled on Highway 17. No reports of missing vehicles. Nothing. But I know what I saw, and I know they saw me, too. My name is Rebecca, and I've been a rideshare driver for the past 3 years. It's not the safest job, especially at night, but I've never been one to scare easily. At least, that's what I used to believe before what happened last Friday. It was nearly 2 a.m., and I was about to call it a night when I received a ride request from an old, abandoned rest stop on Highway 47. I hesitated. The place had been shut down for years after a string of unexplained deaths. Still, curiosity got the best of me. Against my better judgment, I accepted the ride. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty. No cars, no people, just flickering lights, and a dilapidated building covered in graffiti. I checked the app again. The request was still active. The name on it simply read, Michael. I waited a few minutes, drumming my fingers against the steering wheel. Just as I was about to cancel the ride, my back door clicked open. My heart jumped. I hadn't seen anyone approach. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the seat was empty. A cold dread settled over me. I turned in my seat, scanning the back. Hello? No response. The door shut by itself, and the air inside the car grew freezing. My breath came out in white puffs. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but my hands wouldn't move. It was like something was keeping me in place. Then, the app's voice navigation spoke. Drive. The screen updated with a new destination, a location deep in the woods, far from any known roads. My phone refused to close the app, and the car's engine roared to life on its own. I wasn't in control anymore. With no other choice, I pressed the gas. The road ahead was shrouded in fog, the highway barely visible. The longer I drove, the stronger the feeling of being watched grew. Shadows flickered in my peripheral vision. My radio crackled, though it wasn't on. A whisper crawled through the speakers. "You picked him up." I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. "Who's there?" The voice ignored me. "Don't look back." My pulse pounded. I kept my eyes on the road, resisting every urge to check the mirror. I didn't need to see it, I could feel it. Something was in the back seat, breathing, watching. The car suddenly jerked to the right. My hands remained locked on the wheel, but it turned on its own, steering me onto a dirt road leading into the forest. The lights of the highway disappeared. Behind me, I was completely alone. "Please," I whispered. "I don't want to do this." The whisper in the radio returned. "Almost there." The trees on either side grew denser, their branches clawing at the car like hands trying to drag me in. Then, up ahead, I saw it, a small, decrepit house with a single light glowing in the window. The car came to a stop. The back door opened with a slow creak. I didn't look. I didn't breathe. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, the door shut. The weight in the car was gone. The cold lifted, and I could move again. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel. I didn't dare check the mirror. I just slammed my foot on the gas and sped back toward the highway, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached the interstate, I pulled over to catch my breath. My phone vibrated. I hesitated before looking at the screen. The ride had ended. No charge, no record of the trip, and the name Michael was gone. My name is Daniel, and I've spent the past 5 years working as a long-haul truck driver. I enjoy the solitude, the long stretches of open road, and the sense of freedom that comes with being constantly on the move. But after what happened last night, I don't think I'll ever be able to drive the interstate at night again. It started around 2 a.m. on a particularly desolate stretch of highway. The road was empty, save for the occasional passing car, and the only lights came from my high beams cutting through the thick darkness. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere when I saw her standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, her pale face barely illuminated in the glow of my headlights. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with long dark hair and a simple white dress that seemed oddly outdated. Something about her made me uneasy, but I'd picked up hitchhikers before. Maybe she'd run out of gas, or her car had broken down further up the road. Against my better judgment, I slowed to a stop and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. She nodded but said nothing. Up close, she looked even paler than before, her skin almost translucent in the dim light. I motioned for her to get in, and she climbed into the passenger seat without a word. As soon as she shut the door, a sudden chill filled the cab, making my breath visible in the air. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to shake off the creeping unease. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little further up the road. I'll tell you when to stop." I nodded and kept driving, the silence stretching between us. Every so often, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She sat unnaturally still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring straight ahead. I tried to make small talk, but she didn't respond. The unease in my stomach twisted into something heavier, something closer to fear. About 10 miles later, she finally spoke again. "Here." I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder, but when I turned to tell her we'd arrived, my breath caught in my throat. The seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There had been no sound, no movement. She was just gone. My heart pounded as I scanned the road, half expecting to see her standing outside, but there was nothing. Just the vast, empty highway stretching endlessly in both directions. Swallowing hard, I reached for my phone and pulled up a map. I needed to know where I was. I zoomed in on the nearest town and saw a diner about a mile ahead. Desperate for human contact, I started the truck back up and drove straight there. The diner was small, the kind that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. I parked and stepped inside, the warm scent of coffee and bacon momentarily grounding me. A few late-night customers sat at the counter, and an older man in a flannel shirt glanced up as I walked in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half-dashed joking. I let out a nervous laugh. "Maybe I have." He gestured for me to sit, and I did, ordering a black coffee. As I stirred in some sugar, I hesitated, then decided to ask, "Have you ever heard stories about a woman hitchhiking on the highway out there? Pale, dark hair, white dress." The man's face darkened. He set his coffee down, his fingers tightening around the mug. "You saw her?" I nodded slowly. "I picked her up, but she disappeared before we got to her stop." He exhaled sharply and shook his head. "You're not the first. That woman died on that road 10 years ago. She was on her way home from a wedding when her car broke down. A truck driver stopped to help, but he wasn't a good man. They found her body in a ditch a week later." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "And she's been hitchhiking ever since." The man nodded, trying to get home. I didn't finish my coffee. I barely made it out the door before my legs gave out beneath me. When I finally got back in my truck, I swore I'd never drive that stretch of road again. But as I merged back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw her, sitting silently in the back seat. My name is Mark, and I've been a trucker for over 15 years. I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing not the ghost towns, the wandering figures on the roadside, or even the stories truckers tell each other at rest stops prepared me for what happened on exit 66. I was hauling cargo through a long stretch of highway that night. The road was quiet, the moon high, and the only sound was the steady hum of my truck's engine. I'd been driving for nearly 10 hours straight, and exhaustion was beginning to set in. That's when my GPS blared out a sudden, unexpected direction. "Take exit 66 in 1 mile." I frowned. I didn't remember ever seeing an exit 66 on this stretch before, but maybe I had just overlooked it. Figuring I could use some gas, and maybe a quick coffee, I decided to follow the GPS's suggestion. As I approached, the exit loomed ahead, barely lit, the sign weathered and covered in grime. Something about it felt oofa-fi. Turned onto the exit ramp, and that's when my radio crackled to life. "Turn around." The voice was distorted, barely audible. I grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" Silence then. Another crackle. "Get off this road." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at the radio, then back at the road ahead. The ramp led to an empty, 2-lane road stretching into the darkness. No gas stations, no buildings, just endless pavement lined with skeletal trees. My headlights flickered, and my dashboard clock froze. 3:17 a.m. Something wasn't right. I reached for the gear shift, ready to turn back, when I noticed something in my side mirror. Headlights, approaching fast. My grip on the wheel tightened. Another truck, but there hadn't been any vehicles behind me a moment ago. The lights grew brighter, closer, until they were nearly blinding. I squinted, trying to make out the shape of the vehicle, but it wasn't right. It was distorted, shifting, like it wasn't entirely there then. My truck's engine sputtered. Panic surged through me. The headlights behind me began flashing, and the radio crackled one last time. Too late. My truck lurched forward on its own. My hands were on the wheel, but it wasn't me controlling it. The road twisted and stretched unnaturally, as if I was no longer on the same plane of existence. The sky above seemed deeper, the stars wrong. And then, I saw it. A gas station appeared up ahead, flickering like a mirage. I slammed the brakes, forcing the truck to stop just in front of the entrance. The second I did, the headlights behind me vanished. My truck's clock began ticking again. 3:18 a.m. The gas station looked abandoned, the neon sign buzzing weakly. I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel, and approached the small, dust-covered window. Inside, a single old man sat behind the counter, staring at me with wide, knowing eyes. "You took the wrong exit," he said before I could even speak. "They don't let you leave." I swallowed hard. "Who?" He just shook his head. "You best hope they didn't notice you." A cold wind blew through the empty lot, and I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever he was talking about, it had already noticed me. I didn't ask any more questions. I got back in my truck, turned it around, and sped back toward the highway. As I merged back onto the interstate, I looked in my rearview mirror. Exit 66 was gone. The sign, the road, everything, like it had never existed. But I know it did, and I know something was waiting for me there.